The world shrinks as you get older. Mine had contracted to the four walls of this house, perched on the side of Shadow Mountain like a stubborn old pine. The floorboards, worn smooth by the passage of my life and my husband's before me, spoke in a language of familiar creaks. Each morning, light filtered through the tall ponderosis, painting shifting patterns on the dust motes that danced in the still air. My ritual was silence and observation. The way the blue jays bullied the squirrels at the feeder, the slow creep of the sun across the braided rag rug in the hall, the settling sigh of the foundation at dusk. These were my companions. The house was a museum of a life lived, the faint scent of my husband's pipe tobacco clinging stubbornly to the worn velvet of his favorite armchair, a chipped porcelain ballerina from my childhood pirouetting silently on the mantelpiece. Everything held a story, and the stories were beginning to weigh more than the objects themselves. The town of Havenwood was nestled in the valley below, a place I rarely visited anymore. Its sounds were a distant murmur, a reminder of a world that moved at a pace I no longer kept. My porch was my continent, the hummingbirds my frantic city dwellers, the sprawling vista of the valley my unchanging ocean. The solitude was a heavy blanket, sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating. It was a life of waiting, though I hadn't admitted for what. Waiting for a phone call, waiting for a visit, waiting for a sign that the life I had poured into another had been a worthy investment. My connection to the world outside this house had a name. Leo. He lived a quarter-mile down the winding dirt road, in a small A-frame he'd built himself. He was younger, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and hands that were never still, always fixing a fence post or tending his sprawling vegetable garden. Twice a week, he'd bring my groceries, his old truck rattling to a stop in a cloud of dust. "Morning, Eleanor," he'd call out, his voice a welcome intrusion into my quiet. He never pitied me, which was the greatest kindness of all. We'd sit on the porch swing, a cup of tea for me, a glass of water for him, and talk about nothing and everything. The severity of the coming winter, the stubbornness of a particular weed in his garden, the latest book he'd been reading. He was a volunteer EMT, a fact he mentioned only once, and his presence was a quiet reassurance, a sturdy anchor in my drifting world. He was sitting with me on the porch, the late afternoon sun turning the valley golden, when the memory ambushed me as it often did. It arrived unbidden, a ghost of a conversation from 15 years ago, so vivid I could almost feel the stiff fabric of the bank's waiting room chair against my back. David, my son, sat beside me, vibrating with a desperate, brilliant energy. He was 25, all sharp angles and sharper dreams, his eyes full of the New York City skyline he was determined to conquer. He had a business plan, a partner, a shoebox apartment that cost more than my entire yearly income. All he needed was capital. "It's a sure thing, Mom," he'd said, his voice low and urgent, his hand covering mine. His hands, I remember thinking, were no longer a boy's. They were the hands of a man who took what he wanted from the world. "This isn't a loan. It's an investment. In me. In our future. I'll pay you back double, triple. You'll see." The sacrifice wasn't just the money, procured by a second mortgage that had felt like a second skin being peeled away. It was this house. It was my security, the last great gift from my husband, a fortress built of love and labor. Signing those papers was an act of faith so profound it bordered on foolishness. I was betting the roof over my head on my son's ambition. I looked at his face, so full of earnest conviction, the face I had loved since the moment I first saw it, and I pushed aside the knot of fear in my stomach. I signed my name, my hand steady, and in doing so, handed him the foundation of my life, believing he would build something magnificent upon it. I was investing not in a business, but in the memory of the boy who once held my hand while crossing the street, who believed I was the strongest person in the world. The porch swing creaked, pulling me back to the present. The sun had dipped lower, and a chill was settling in. My phone had remained silent all day. The last time I'd spoken to David, 2 weeks ago, the call had lasted less than 3 minutes. He was in the middle of a merger, he'd said, his voice distant and tinny. His daughter, my granddaughter Lily, had a recital. His wife Sarah sent her love. The words were a checklist, recited without warmth, a perfunctory nod to a duty he clearly found burdensome. There was no mention of the investment, no talk of paying anything back. There never was. The future he had promised me had never arrived. It had been permanently deferred, lost somewhere in the canyons of the city he now called home. It started with the rug. The beautiful, braided rag rug my grandmother had made. Its colors faded to soft pastels. For years, its edge had curled up, a minor imperfection I always meant to fix. My foot caught, a simple, clumsy misstep. But in the fragile architecture of an 80-year-old body, there are no simple missteps. The world didn't spin. It tilted, a slow, deliberate capsizing. My hip, not my foot, met the unyielding oak of the floor. The sound was not a crack, but a flat, definitive thud. A sound of finality that echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the house. I lay there, looking up at the ceiling, watching a spider meticulously work on its web in the corner. The world had not stopped. Only I had. Pain, when it is pure and absolute, is a universe unto itself. It started as a hot, searing point in my hip and bloomed outward, a dark flower with thorny petals that wrapped around my leg, my back, my very breath. For a long while, I did nothing but exist inside that pain. The afternoon light, which had been so gentle before, now seemed harsh, illuminating every speck of dust on the floorboards, each one a tiny, indifferent star in my new, fallen cosmos. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The house, my sanctuary, had become a trap. Its silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. The phone was on the hall table, a distance that could have been a mile. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of pain. I had to call David. He would come. He had to. The thought was a prayer. I began to crawl. It was a slow, agonizing journey across the sea of the living room floor. I pulled myself forward with my arms, my useless leg a dead weight, sending jolts of pure agony through my body with every movement. The polished wood was cool against my cheek. I could smell the lemon polish I used every Thursday. The mundane details of my life mocked me. Each inch was a victory paid for in a currency of whimpers and gritted teeth. Time ceased to exist. There was only the table leg, growing closer at a glacial pace. Finally, my fingers brushed against it. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled myself up just enough to knock the cordless phone from its cradle. It clattered to the floor beside me. My hands were trembling, slick with sweat. I fumbled with the buttons, my vision blurring. I knew his number by heart, a rhythm my fingers had tapped out thousands of times. It rang. The sound was a cheerful, upbeat pop song, Sarah's Choice. I was sure. It was the most offensive sound I had ever heard. It rang and rang, a giddy, relentless counterpoint to my agony. Then his voice, not him, but a recording of him. "You've reached David. Leave a message." The cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a clipped, efficient tone. A sob caught in my throat. "David?" I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. "David, it's Mom. I've fallen. I'm at the house. I think my hip. Please, honey. Please call me." The line went dead. I lay my head on the cool floor, the silence rushing back in, heavier than before. Hope, I realized, was a fragile, hollow bone, and mine had just been shattered. I don't know how long I lay there. The light had begun to fade, the shadows in the room lengthening into dark, grasping fingers. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, there was a sharp rapping on the front door, followed by Leo's voice calling my name. "Eleanor? Are you in there?" The mail's still in the box. I tried to answer, but only a weak croak came out. A moment later, I heard the sound of the back door, the one I always left unlocked for him, opening. His footsteps were quick on the floorboards. "Oh my God, Eleanor!" He was beside me in an instant, his face a mask of concern. He didn't ask what happened. He was already pulling out his phone, his voice calm and authoritative. "This is EMT Leo Croft," he said. "I'm at 142 Mountain Crest Lane. I have an approximately 80-year-old female, conscious, suspected hip fracture." He stayed on the line, talking to me in a low, soothing voice, telling me they were on their way, that it would be okay. He was the help that came, not my son. A near stranger whose kindness I had not earned, but who gave it freely anyway. The abandonment was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical thing, a cold, heavy presence in the room with us. I was in the hospital for 3 days before the surgery, a blur of beige rooms and sympathetic, overworked nurses. Leo was the one who sat with me, who brought me a book and a clean nightgown from my house. He was there after the surgery, too, when I woke up groggy and disoriented, a long, neat line of staples marching down my thigh. My phone sat on the bedside table, a silent black rectangle. It was on the 2nd day post-op that it finally lit up. Not with a call, but with a text message. It wasn't even from David. It was from Sarah. I fumbled for my glasses, my heart doing a foolish little flutter. Asterisk, so sorry to hear about your fall. David swamped with a huge project. Can't get away. Things are insane here. Let us know what the doctors say. XOS. Asterisk, I read it once. Then a second time. The words were so breezy, so utterly dismissive. Swamped. As if my shattered hip was a minor inconvenience. A scheduling conflict. There was no concern, no question of when he could come, just a delegation of reporting back. The little XO at the end was the cruelest part, a meaningless affectation tacked onto a message of profound indifference. A coldness spread through my chest, so absolute it felt like a second anesthetic. Leo, sitting quietly in the visitor's chair, must have seen the change in my face. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and gently took my hand. His warmth was the only thing that felt real. The next few weeks were spent in a rehabilitation facility, a place that smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. My days were measured by small, painful victories. Sitting up on my own, moving from the bed to a wheelchair, and finally, taking a few agonizing steps with a walker down a long, polished corridor. The physical pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the emotional landscape I was forced to navigate. The long hours between physical therapy sessions were a vacuum filled with memory and regret. I was surrounded by people, yet I had never felt so alone. Leo was my only regular visitor. He'd bring me coffee from the good place in town and sit with me, listening. At first, I didn't speak of David, but slowly, prodded by his quiet, patient presence, the stories began to spill out. I told him about the mortgage, about the endless stream of excuses, about the growing distance I had pretended not to notice. Verbalizing it made it real, transforming years of vague disappointment into a sharp, undeniable betrayal. One afternoon, staring out the window at a dreary, rain-soaked parking lot, a different kind of memory surfaced, a jewel unearthed from the mud. David was 7 years old. We were camping, just the 3 of us, on the very land where my house now stood. My husband, John, was showing him how to build a proper fire, laying the kindling in a careful lattice. I remember the look on David's face, illuminated by the first flickering flames. It was pure awe, a complete and total adoration for his father. Later that night, wrapped in a blanket beside me, he'd roasted a marshmallow until it caught fire, then blown it out with a puff of his cheeks, his face smudged with soot and sugar. He'd looked at me, his eyes shining in the dark. "You and Dad know everything," he'd whispered, his small, sticky hand finding mine. The memory was so sweet it was an agony. Where did that boy go? How does a heart that was once so full of innocent love become so closed and hard? The love was real. I knew it was, which only made the man he had become a more tragic figure. A thief who had stolen not just from me, but from himself. The rain streaked down the window pane, and another memory, darker this time, elbowed its way forward. David was in college. He'd called, full of frantic energy, about a once-in-a-lifetime study abroad opportunity in Spain. He needed the money in a week. It was a lot, more than I could comfortably afford. I'd hesitated, gently questioning the academic rigor of a program that seemed to involve more beaches than books. His reaction had been swift and cold. "I knew you wouldn't get it," he'd snapped. "This is about making connections, Mom. You just want to keep me small. Keep me here." The accusation had stung, striking at the very heart of my love for him. The guilt was a lever he used with surgical precision. Of course, I'd given him the money. I found out later, through a photo a friend of his had posted online, that the study tour was little more than a drunken fraternity trip across Europe. When I tried to ask him about it, he'd been evasive, dismissive. It was networking, Mom. You wouldn't understand. I had let it go. I had buried the small, sharp feeling of being played, because I wanted to believe in the brilliant, ambitious son I had raised, not the callous manipulator he was becoming. It had been a warning sign, a bright red flag I had chosen to ignore. Lying in that sterile bed, the pieces clicked into place. The grand sacrifice. The happy memories that now felt like evidence in a trial. The small, cumulative betrayals I had willfully overlooked. And then, the final, damning piece of evidence, a careless text from Sarah a few months before my fall. She had been complaining about Lily being difficult. She was having a tantrum today and told her teacher, "Grandma, Mommy said you're just waiting to die. Kids, where do they get this stuff?" At the time, I'd been horrified, assuming it was a child's garbled misunderstanding. Now, I saw it with a terrifying new clarity. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a direct quote. They saw me as a placeholder, an asset in waiting, not a person, not a mother, but a house and a bank account with a timer running down. My life was an inconvenience, my death an inheritance. The realization didn't bring tears. It brought a profound, crystalline calm. The love I had felt, the endless, giving, sacrificial love of a mother, had been misdirected. It had been poured into a vessel that was not just empty, but cracked. And the cold resolution that filled me was not about revenge. It was about turning off the tap. The idea took root not in the sterile, ordered world of the rehabilitation center, but back in my own house, in my own armchair. Leo had driven me home, helped me settle in, and filled my cupboards. I sat there for a long time, the familiar silence of the rooms now feeling different, lighter. I looked out the large picture window at the mountain, at the trees that stood tall and dignified, asking nothing of anyone but sun and rain. They had been my constant companions. They had witnessed my joy, my grief, and my folly. The mountain didn't belong to David's future. It belonged to my past, and now it would belong to my present. The thought was simple and absolute. I would sell it. All of it. The house, the land, the view. But the money wouldn't go into an account to be inherited. It would go to the people who had shown up. When I told Leo, he didn't seem surprised. He was sitting at my kitchen table, fixing the wobbly leg, a task I'd been meaning to ask him about for months. I laid out the plan, my voice even and clear. I would sell the property and donate a significant portion of the proceeds to the Havenwood Volunteer Fire Department and its EMT service. Enough for them to buy the new emergency vehicle they'd been fundraising for, the one he told me they desperately needed. He stopped sanding the table leg and looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure, Eleanor?" he asked quietly. "This is your home." "It was my home, Leo," I replied, the truth of the words settling comfortably inside me. "Now it's just a house. My home has to be something I build from now on." He nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. He didn't offer platitudes or try to talk me out of it. He simply said, "Okay, I know a good realtor, a friend of mine. She'll take care of you." The process was surprisingly liberating. The realtor, a woman named Carol with a firm handshake and a no-nonsense attitude, understood immediately. She saw not a sad old woman divesting herself of memories, but a woman taking control of her future. There were papers to sign, appraisals to be done. I walked through the rooms with her, not with sadness, but with a new sense of detachment. These were things. Beautiful things, yes, but just things. My legacy would not be in the dust on the mantelpiece. The house sold quickly to a young family from the city. I met them once. Their children, a boy and a girl, ran laughing through the yard, their eyes wide with the wonder of so much space. I saw in their parents the same hopes and dreams John and I once had. Felt right. The day of the closing, Carol drove me to the bank and then to the fire station. I sat across a plain metal table from the fire chief, a burly man with a gentle face. I slid the cashier's check across the table to him. He looked down at the number, then up at me, his eyes glistening. He was speechless for a moment. "Mrs. Vance, Eleanor, I don't know what to say." I just smiled. Say you'll put it to good use. Say that when someone falls, help will come. As I signed the final donation papers, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost dizzying. It was the feeling of a great weight being lifted, not just the weight of a house, but the weight of a misplaced hope I had carried for far too long. David arrived 3 weeks later. I was living in a small, sunny 2-bedroom apartment in town, close to the library and the grocery store. I had just finished arranging my books on a new shelf when I heard the sound of an expensive car engine idling outside. I looked out the window and saw his sleek, silver sedan, a car I'd never seen before, parked at the curb. He emerged, looking rumpled and furious, his phone pressed to his ear. He stormed up the walkway and pounded on my door. When I opened it, he pushed past me into the small living room, his face a thundercloud. "What the hell is going on, Mom?" he demanded, his voice tight with a rage he was barely containing. "I got a tax notice. A capital gains notification forwarded from the house." "What did you do?" His concern wasn't for me, for my well-being or my new living situation. It was for the disruption in his financial expectations. "I sold the house, David," I said, my voice calm. I sat down in my armchair, the one piece of furniture I had kept. His jaw tightened. "You sold it? Without telling me? That house was my inheritance. It was for Lily. It's been in our family for generations. It was my house," I repeated softly. "John and I built it. It was mine to sell. And the money? Where's the money? Don't tell me you put it in some fixed annuity. I have an investment guy, a real professional. He could double that money in 5 years." He was pacing now, a caged animal in my small, peaceful space. His materialism was so naked, so utterly devoid of any real sentiment. He saw the house not as a home, a place of memories, but as a lump sum, a figure on a spreadsheet. "The money is gone," I said. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Don't be ridiculous." "I gave it away," I said, letting the words hang in the air between us. "I donated it to the local volunteer EMTs. They're buying a new emergency vehicle." The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I remembered, lost and confused. But it was quickly replaced by a sneer. "You gave it away? To a bunch of small-town hicks? Are you insane? After everything I've done, everything I'm trying to build for this family." My internal monologue was a quiet, steady hum beneath his tirade. I saw him now not as my son, but as a stranger ranting about a business deal gone wrong. The love I had felt was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. Just then, there was a light knock on the door. It was Leo holding a bag of groceries. He stopped on the threshold, taking in the scene. David shot him a venomous glare. "Who the hell is this?" he spat. "My friend," I said simply. Leo just gave me a small, supportive nod and set the groceries down just inside the door. A silent, steady presence validating my new reality. David threw his hands up in the air. "I don't believe this. I can't believe you would do this to me. To your own family. You are the one," I said, my voice barely a whisper but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "Who taught me the importance of investing in people who show up." He had no answer to that. He stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, and then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound didn't make me flinch. It was the sound of a chapter, a long and painful chapter, finally ending. A year later, the world felt large again. My new life was built not of quiet observation, but of active participation. I found myself at a pancake breakfast at the new, expanded fire station, the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filling the air. The star of the event was parked out front, gleaming red and white. The new rapid response vehicle, a state-of-the-art machine that could handle the treacherous mountain roads. A small plaque was affixed to the passenger side door. Donated in loving memory of John Vance and in honor of the Havenwood first responders. Leo, wearing his official EMT jacket, stood beside me, a plate of pancakes in his hand. "See that, Eleanor?" he said, pointing with his fork. "That's the Vance mobile. We've already used it on 3 calls up on the ridge." It cut the response time in half. A group of young volunteer firefighters came over to thank me, shaking my hand and telling me stories, including me in their circle. I was no longer a solitary observer on a mountain. I was part of a town, a community. I laughed, a real, deep laugh that came from my belly, and it felt like a sound I hadn't made in years. Later that afternoon, sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, I looked out towards the distant peak of Shadow Mountain. It was still there, beautiful and unchanging, but it no longer held any power over me. I felt no anger towards David, no bitterness. I felt a strange, quiet pity for him. He was chasing a future built on numbers and assets, blind to the real wealth of human connection. He thought my life was over, that I was just waiting for the end. He couldn't have been more wrong. My life had just begun. My greatest pain had not been the fall or the broken bone, or even the initial betrayal. It was the slow, creeping realization that the love I had given so freely had been taken as an entitlement. The moment of my liberation wasn't when I sold the house, but when I reinvested its value, not in the stock market my son worshipped, but in the simple, profound currency of community and care. My true legacy wasn't the property I had passed down, but the safety and security I had helped build for others. I had taken back more than just a mountain. I had taken back my life, and in its place, I had found a profound and lasting peace.